Good morning. Welcome to another update on the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium Digital Learning Series. My name is Christopher Reichert. I'm the treasurer of the MIT Sloan Boston Alumni Association, and I'll be joined today, as usual, with the executive chair of the Digital Learning Series and the Symposium, Allan Tate. How are you today, Allan?
I'm fine, Christopher, as long as I can get my camera and microphone working.
There you go. Here we are in September. It's sort of funny. It's the weather is already a little more autumnal, and we start putting away our shorts and summer wear and putting on work wear. But I kind of feel like that song, all dressed up and no place to go. So actually, we should make that a trivia question. Who sang that? So people.
Yeah, exactly.
So everything is almost ready to go. Actually, we got back late last night with my children, and the local park opened up. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, we decided to take a walk through a park that's been closed off to us and now reopened. And we were hoping that was sort of symbolic of where we're going. But I think we're not quite there yet. So let's talk about our last session, the post-pandemic workplace and customer experience. It was a really great conversation led by, two panels, right? Led by Irving Gladsky-Berger and also... who was the other Renee?
It was Paul Mickelman.
Yeah, it was a really good conversation. Is there any themes that you kind of picked up on that panel?
Yeah, and I think so. This was a little bit of an expanded format. 2020 has been a trial, and so as we go month to month, we're kind of making the content have more panels, more complex logistics. In terms of this one, I thought the conversation was excellent in both panels. Irving started out talking about, the employee experience in the pandemic, and these guys brought up a lot of points. And the thing I think that struck me in both panels was the human-centeredness of all the points they brought out. For example, Mendy, in Irving's panel, talked a lot about how he was reaching out to employees, both in terms of team meetings and individual calls, because they had gone from 2,000 employees in some small number of offices to 2,000 employees in 2,000 offices.
Yeah, I thought
and that just made a lot of changes for him.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting. It was kind of a startling way to look at it instead of a narrow focal point, and particularly as from a security perspective, your footprint just got incredibly larger. But beyond even security, the experience for employees, but also customers, and that was one of their themes that I saw, that it's even more vital today to have a good customer experience there. I think we've all been pretty forgiving in terms of how you call organizations and they say they're on reduced hours and whatnot, and employees are working remotely. But after a while, you start thinking, what if I still have questions and needs as a customer? And so I think organizations that step up and recover, I suppose, if you will, and introduce new ways of doing that are going to hold themselves in good stead moving forward.
Well, so Ash, who was representing JetBlue, he talked about the experience that he went through, basically going with, reduced flights, back in the January, February timeframe, to literally shutting down. And, his focus on trying to, both keep customers satisfied, and innovating in terms of, using contactless touch points so that, people could avoid the virus. But the other thing that came up a number of times for me was the increased importance of data science. And not to say that people haven't been using machine learning and artificial intelligence, but I think that there's been, for example, Ash talked about how in COVID-19 it's become very important to be able to anticipate, how many no-shows they're going to have for a flight. And so just this booming use of data science to try to cope with the pandemic was interesting. It's not something that would have come to mind right away for me.
Yeah, it was. There was one comment someone mentioned. I forget who said it. That Microsoft. I think it came from Microsoft. That they've experienced more innovation in the last 6 months than over the last 2 years. And I think that that's. I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon.
Right.
But from the a customer experience and employee experience, some of the challenges that were brought up were that the virtual water cooler, somehow introducing a virtual water cooler, particularly with onboarding new employees and new staff, you can't bring them on and learn the tribal knowledge that gets passed down in between the formal sessions at the water cooler, and also virtual whiteboarding ideas and brainstorming is really, really difficult in a virtual world with Zoom meetings.
It is very hard in a virtual world. I agree with that. And so I just want to say to the audience, one thing that I just put into the chat, a couple of articles that were written after the last episode. One of which was written by Catchpoint, which I thought was a great summary of the episode, and then the other one by CIO Dive, and one of our moderators in episode 4 is going to be from CIO Dive. I just wanted to share those, and for people listening, you can get these same articles off of our website. We list all the articles that are published there, so poke around and you'll find them.
Yeah, so the website on that is mitcio.com. And if you go to the agenda page, you can watch all of our online webinars and also find links to these articles and other elements. So for anyone's listening or watching, that's always available in addition to our YouTube channel, which has this series of videos plus other videos as well. I think one of the things that kept coming back in the conversation was there was biometrics as a new common thing, right? And I think there was a question of security and privacy, and I think we've seen this coming, and it's always one of those things. Yeah, we'll get to it, sort of thing. People still there were some old habits that weren't giving way, but in the new pandemic, we've been forced into innovating even more rapidly, and they kept talking about all these new technologies. I keep wondering if we're going to be having social distancing technology in our cell phones. So, like when you're at the airport or Home Depot or any place you're outside, keeping a distance from people is one of the challenges because we are a sociable species. But with this pandemic, you have to keep it apart. And instead of becoming a confrontation between people, maybe there's a way of that being built into our devices to kind of give us a warning, almost like a Geiger counter.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Google and Apple just released a contact tracing feature that is, if I'm not built into the operating system rather than an app that you have to download.
Yeah, well, I was thinking something a little less irritating than parking sensors, which tells you how close you are.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, do we need that? Sounds awful, but maybe it's not. And I was also thinking that, maybe wonder if other technologies that people wear, so your smart, your Apple Watch or the Android versions of that, maybe they'll have some sort of temperature check built in and a cough check, a breathing sensor. I don't know. Recently I was seeing an article that the 1918 pandemic is still with us in many ways. Some of the strains of influenza that our vaccines keep evolving every year. We get a new type of vaccine profile. Some of that is to combat things from 1918. So point being, this is not going anywhere soon or for a long time.
Yeah, well, what you're saying reminds me of something that I heard Renee say in her talk. This was during the second panel about human experience being the centerpiece of an enterprise digital strategy. So, and she brought up a number of examples of how algorithms can be biased, she had a picture of President Obama, and then that was misrepresented because the algorithm didn't recognize or didn't fill in the blanks properly.
Dead wrong on someone we know very well.
She had another algorithm which was looking at something that you would type into a web page, and then depending on very subtle changes on what you said, would change its prediction of, the gender of the person, making the change. And, she was really emphasizing how, we have a lot of these amazing technologies, but we really have to think about, what's going to be the impression of the customer and all the customers when they're using them, because making these kinds of mistakes can be off-putting to
Cost
people.
your reputation dearly. Absolutely.
You know,
The other
uh,
the other theme that I heard, which I've heard in a few different places, is companies are seeing this as an opportunity to hire for talent, not just location. So since everyone's remote, it really sort of democratizes where
yeah.
people can live, whether it's same time zone, same country, or around the world.
So
Particularly
Wendy, in the first panel, mentioned that as one of the silver linings, that once they had moved everyone into a homework situation, now they actually expanded the pool of applicants that they were able to go after, because it wasn't so focused on the particular locations where their offices were. And he was talking about how they hired a lot of very, very strong applicants from a much wider geographic area. So that is a silver lining in terms of opportunity for people.
yeah, and of course the rub is access to internet and
Well, and actually, he brought that up too, and talked about the digital divide, and that's a problem that we definitely need to solve, because everybody's needs access, and if you don't have it, then you're playing. You just don't have the same opportunities. Definitely.
yeah, and so on the customer experience side, and I think it's maybe the human side. There was a conversation about behavioral economics, designing experiences to meet people where they are, and giving people a sense of control and agency. And I think that's true for customers as well as employees, and as a way of humanizing the use of technology, balancing the potential for privacy intrusions, right? In other words, the more we know about you or me or each of us individually, the better we can, in theory, customize the experience. But there's always the trust issue, and how do you keep people feeling that their information is safe and that they're in control and have agency in how that's used?
Well, that also, in the second panel, I think that came up. I mean, and again, going back to Renee, she was talking about how when some of these social crises happen, putting things on Twitter, yeah, that's fine, but it doesn't really go far enough. That being genuine, being transparent with the data that you have, it's a lot of work to actually build customer trust. And Gail Evans made an interesting point, saying that there's a balance between economics and empathy, which I thought was a nice way of putting it. And then Akash also noted how we as the human race are very resilient, and felt that there was a lot of demonstration where we were able to adapt to this crisis rapidly.
Yeah, and I think that the other sort of counterpoint to that was the conversation about how in times of crisis people revert to intuitive thinking, which is not necessarily always
Oh yeah, yeah,
optimal.
yeah. The
Uh,
fast and slow thinking.
yeah, and I think also where companies can basically be react in the same way intuitively, as opposed to taking a pause and a beat. And I think that's where a lot of the research in artificial intelligence and behavioral economics, and behavioral thinking comes in, where you can have an initial reaction, but having deeper insights into the customer experience and what customers are looking for, can pull you out of that intuitive thinking place, which is actually good in some levels. In other words, that's the empathetic side of us. but it doesn't scale well, perhaps.
Mhm.
I know it, and I've also often wondered about that with large organizations that push. There was a conversation about edge computing, particularly with, I guess, with access to pushing technology beyond the cloud closer to the edge. So in this case, employees and customers. Um, but there's that balance, right, between every experience being unique and somehow making that scalable and empowering employees at the front end, but not making every case an exception to some sort of standard for quality control.
Yeah, well, scalability is always a problem when you're building these kinds of complex systems and human systems. So, um, well, I have to say, I do hope that if people did not attend that episode, that they do go back and watch the video. I think, really, we've only hit the highlights here, and there was a lot of excellent conversation.
Yeah, there was a really interesting book. I just want to, I think you have a poll you want to put up about generally, but I wanted to point people to a book that was written a number of years ago by Joe Pine, who was an MIT graduate, who talked about, and this is something going back, I want to say about 20 years, but I think it really still holds true today, which is the idea of mass customization. And I think that was an early foray into the notion of a unique experience for each individual user, but on a massive scale. And so where's that 80-20 rule come in, where you create a mass experience for 80% and a custom experience for the 20% on top? Maybe it's the icing on the cupcake or something like that. But anyway, Joe Pine wrote a book about that a number of years ago, and I would say it's probably a good read still today. So.
I'll make a note of that. Maybe I'll have a read. Yeah, so I do have a poll, and I also want to talk about the results of the last time. I mean, this webinar, as well as the surveys we're doing, I guess is our attempt at doing co-creation, which is a little buzzword that they had from the last episode. So is now a good time to talk about that?
Go for it, yeah. And I think then let's talk about our next episode, number 4.
All right. So the last time we had an update, we talked about just the possibility of doing virtual content in 2021. Not to say that in person is ruled out, but what I said last time is I don't want to ask the audience about in person until we get deeper into the fall. So probably in the October timeframe, we'll get into that after we have a little bit more experience with people going back to school and going to college and see how all that works out. So for now, we're just talking about virtual. The question that I asked was, did people prefer for virtual content only a digital learning series style of monthly webinars versus a symposium style, which is an all-day event? The results came back 3-1 in favor of the digital learning style. So basically 67% either preferred or strongly preferred the digital learning style, 22% preferred or strongly preferred the symposium style, and 11% had no opinion. So we're going to follow up with a poll. Now I'm going to say this poll is a preview of survey number 2. And so you can take the poll, but when you take the survey after this webinar, you can also suggest additional questions that we could work into the poll. So there's a number of opportunities to help us. So the first one is, assuming that we do deliver virtual content in a digital learning series style, what amount of time do you want to allocate monthly for the digital learning series? And so do you want an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, or more? And keep in mind that in 2020, we've been experimenting with this. We started out with fairly simple webinars. I think they were 60 or 90 minutes, and we're moving up in October where it's going to be close to 3 hours. So you haven't had the whole range yet, but I think that people have an idea of what we're doing and so can vote on that. The second question is, so although we have a 3-1 for the digital learning series, if we also had a longer day. It gives us the opportunity to incorporate some other elements to the delivery, and that would include live group networking, like breakout rooms, or live one-on-one networking, which is sort of like speed dating, or we could have a private social network where the actual audience has an opportunity to get to know one another and exchange contact information, kind of like a private LinkedIn. Sponsored demo rooms where people could go and visit the sponsors, get a demo, ask questions. Town hall meeting. So this is an interesting idea, and I saw this at another event that I attended a couple of weeks ago. After the event, they literally had a meeting. Everybody was a participant. It was moderated, but anybody who was attending could get on screen and speak their piece. And I thought it was an interesting idea. There's, of course, access to the webinar recordings and presentation materials. There's the some webinars I notice have what I call a live webinar context, where as you're logged in, you can get access to the schedule and bios and panel descriptions, which for our webinars right now, you can get that, but you have to go to our webpage. Mm-hmm. There's also accessibility features, closed captioning and translations, and then more sophisticated audience upvoting. So I'm going to run the poll.
Yeah.
And
I think we really want to hear people's thoughts and feedback on what's working, what's not working, and how we can make this better. So please participate in that panel, in that poll rather. So that's sort of for planning for 2021. So while that's up,
I'll give people a few minutes to fill it, or a minute to fill in the poll. Like I say, there are 2 questions. You should see it. I also want to just look while we're waiting. There's a couple of things here in Q&A. So the answer to the first question is I don't know anything about the Halo device. Do you?
This is actually just came out. It's a new sort of Fitbit competitor. And it's a good question whether it's tracking psychological data. I mean, there's an entire industry of psychiatry and psychology that's probably struggling with that topic, human to human. I'm not sure. Maybe AI is being utilized to garner the collective experience of Freud and all of those into a digital format. But I think, but it's actually physiological. Sorry, we got it. I thought it was psychological, physiological. Yeah, and I guess the question is, I don't think it's been released yet. So really, how deep and what difference it is between an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or any of the other kind of devices out there is hard to say. I wonder if it's going to listen for when you open that last box of cornflakes and automatically auto-subscribe you from Amazon to reorder it.
Listen, when I have that extra chocolate chip cookie at night, I take my devices off. And,
yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
And I lie to my diet app occasionally.
Right.
Come on.
My scale just
don't we all?
So wrong. Actually, I went to my brother's house recently, and I stepped on his scale, and it literally added 16 pounds to my weight. And I said, I don't think the drive from Boston to Philadelphia was that long. So something is terribly wrong here. If it had gone the other direction, I would, of course, loved it very much. So how's your poll going? Do you want to? I noticed, by the way, you're engaging in voter suppression. That I and host and panelists can't vote. Just pointing that out.
Well, actually, so we have one more question. Let's just look at that, and then I'll go back to the poll. So it is supposed to track sentiment based on your voice biometrics. Interesting. There was a app that I downloaded. I don't remember the name. I'll have to look it up. That would listen to your voice. This was developed in Israel, and then give you a personality profile. I don't know if this is the same kind of technology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remains to be seen whether it's an Amazon Fire phone or it's an Apple Watch killer, right?
All right. Well, the poll's been up. We have over 50% that have voted. The voting is anonymous, by the way, so that I did it that way to encourage people to vote. But let's end the poll and see.
And by the way, thanks to Canon for questions.
Hopefully people can see this. It looks like people prefer the panels to be 1 to 2 hours. We're getting no votes for anything longer than that, so that makes sense. And then
live group networking looks popular. 50% said they want
that one. So not so much the one-on-one. So the group networking is definitely more popular. Some votes for the social network.
Looks like town hall.
Everybody wants access to recordings.
Yep.
So interesting. A lot of votes for the live webinar context. I wasn't sure how important that was going to be.
Yeah.
And also that another interesting result here is only 21% for the upvoting. And that's important to me because, we have Q&A via Zoom. There are other technologies that we could use like, so for example, at the in-person symposium, we used a product called Slido, which would allow a richer upvoting experience.
Particularly for people who are shy and don't want to stand up in front of 900 people and ask.
Yeah.
It's stressful for sure.
Although we have Q&A here.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
good stuff. Hey, so I'm conscious of time. I just want to highlight episode number 4, which I think is going to be great. I mean, there are some amazing speakers on this one coming up, starting with Sandy Pentland from the MIT Media Lab. He's just a really dynamic to hear from him and his research. And we're going to be, I think, so why don't you just quickly talk about the difference between the post-pandemic enterprise, which is the theme of that one, and what we've been talking about, which is the post-pandemic workplace and customer experience.
Okay. So episode 4, we have 2 full panels. And so those panels, the first one is going to be the increased importance of business continuity and resiliency planning. And I'll just quickly say that we experienced this in episode 3 because both Irving and Esh lost power due to the storm that happened before that episode. And we almost had to replan the whole panel because they had no internet connection. So we got teased by that. So now we have a panel talking about that, which, as I mentioned, people are working at home. Everybody needs an internet connection. And so, how do you plan for the business resiliency and so forth for that? Now, the second panel, and by the way, that panel is going to be led by Naomi Idas, who's the CIO Dive person. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to have another person from the press moderating the panel. The second panel is going to be on building the post-pandemic enterprise. And I think that this really builds on some of the things that were said in episode 3. If you go and watch that, you'll hear that people are talking about how a lot of the innovations and changes that have come about due to COVID-19 are not going to go away even after we have a vaccine. So, what is going to be the new normal? It's not just going to be going back to normal. It's going to be a new normal. And so, what's that going to look like? So we have 2 very prominent people from McKinsey, Rodney Zimmel, who will be doing an introductory presentation on their research on this topic, and then James Manika, who are going to co-lead this panel discussion. As you mentioned, we have Sandy Pentland, and we also have a number of other excellent speakers.
Yeah, April Sandoval from Slack is going to be on that one, and I'd be really, Slack has been, early out of the gate for years now with collaborative online technologies that kind of have moved beyond, instant messaging and certainly email.
And April is just a data science expert. She just has a ton of technical experience in that field. So, I think that she's going to add a lot. Well, you can check our agenda page for a list of all the speakers. But I think it's going to be a really exciting episode, and I do hope people tune in.
Yeah, and I think it's going to really build on the theme that we've been having, which we've been forced into, pandemic-wise. So thanks very much, Alan. I'm conscious of time and everyone's time out there. Thanks for everyone for participating out there. I see some familiar names on this list. Hello to everyone there. And these updates are produced by the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium Digital Learning Series production team. And you can, again, watch our recordings. Go to mitcio.com/agenda. You can watch them anytime you want there. And we have a bunch of social media links you can see up on the screen now, with between Twitter and Facebook, and our LinkedIn group. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors, without whom this would not be possible. So that includes Adobe and Catchpoint, Equinix, and Slack, of course, coming up soon, and Rimini Street and VM as well. So subscribe to our updates and our podcast. You can find our podcast on wherever you get your normal podcast. Be sure to sign up for the next episode, which is September 9th. We just talked about the topic, but I think we'll put it up on the screen there. Be some really interesting conversations between Naomi Ida from Industry Dive, as well as Rodney Zimmel and James Manyika from McKinsey Digital and McKinsey & Company. So thanks very much for joining us on this. Thank you again, Alan, for a great conversation. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today.